Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Abuja and the US try to work out a way to fulfill the requirements to convince Washington to remove Nigeria from a painful travel ban that blindsided Africa's most populous nation when it was announced last week. Also, as Kenya enters a second day of mourning for Daniel Arap Moyo on Wednesday, some of those who suffered under the country's longest serving president refuse to celebrate his complicated legacy. And Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer arrive in Cape Town ahead of a superstar tennis charity match due later this week. The event pits the world's top tennis stars against each other in order to raise money for Federer's foundation, which supports education on the continent. We head to one school that has so far benefited from some of the funding it generates. But first, Nigeria has introduced a new visa policy to bring in more foreign investment and talent. The new rules will make it easier for visiting Africans to get trips greenlit. Meanwhile, Abuja is also frantically working towards improving the chances of its nationals getting visas to the United States. Nigeria said that it was blindsided by Washington's decision last Friday to add it to a list of countries subject to a travel ban. Nigeria's foreign minister met with the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in Washington this week, and the men have said that they are hoping that the ban can be lifted if Abuja fulfills some of the security demands being made by Washington. Samuel Okoya has more on what Nigeria can do to get the US visa ban lifted.
To start with, Nigeria has set up a committee that will work in conjunction with authorities in the US and the international police to know exactly the changes the Americans want. And then I think back home, definitely they will be taking some measures. For example, it's just been announced that to even get a SIM card now, a telephone SIM card, you will need your national identity card, which many people don't have. It was seen as the telephones, the SIM cards, were being used to perpetrate a lot of crime. So back home, I think Nigeria will be taking a lot of measures, and the government has said is very much willing to share the kind of information the Americans need. But then you really have to get this information first in Nigeria before you can share these things.
And how big a deal was it when Nigeria's place on that US banned list was made public? Will this really affect the lives of many Nigerians or the hopes of many Nigerians?
Well, Nigerians have a very high travel rates to the US. It's like one of the most, the country the largest number of Nigerians travel to. So it's a shock to many Nigerians that this has happened, and many people have expressed unhappiness about it. Many have blamed the government. Some have said it's the issue of misgovernance, that the US should have only targeted those in government rather than made it a blanket situation. So definitely there will be a lot of effects, and I think that maybe Nigerians might start looking towards Canada and the UK and maybe France as an alternative.
Now, tell us more as well about these changes that Nigeria itself is making to make its borders more accessible to Africans on the continent.
Well, the government said the government is trying to attract businesses, and they said it would be nice for it to be easy for other Africans to enter Nigeria without so much hurdles. So you don't need a visa. If you're an African, you only get that visa on arrival. But even then, they said the system will be highly controlled. It wouldn't be prone to bribery or corruption. It's automated, and it's such that you can only get this thing done at the airport, not at the land borders. They are hoping that it will allow business people to come in. It will allow professionals to come in. So it will allow tourists to come in also. So the country is hoping to get a lot of benefit from this new visa system. But I think also you have to put a lot of things in place before it can really attract the kind of things they are talking about. Because in a country where electricity is lacking, where the roads are bad, it takes more than just making visa easily available for people who want to invest to actually come to be attracted to the country.
Samuel Okoye there for us. Now, Lesotho's First Lady was out on bail on Wednesday night after earlier appearing in court charged with the murder of her husband's previous wife. Maisaya Tabane turned herself in on Tuesday after having been on the run for weeks. Police issued an arrest warrant for her over the fatal shooting of Prime Minister Thomas Tabane's estranged spouse, Lipolelo, in 2017. Lipolelo was killed just days before her husband became leader. The couple were going through a bitter divorce at the time. Maisaya married Tabane 2 months after Lipolelo's death. The case has gripped the nation.
I have the burning desire. I'm zealous to see where we have the First Lady, like any other Mosotho, going, being charged.
Yeah, it's very disappointing regarding what's happening. We've been haunted and taunted by selective justice in this country.
Suppose she is found guilty and she's convicted of murder. I think for Lesotho that would be a first step. That would teach everyone. That would be a lesson for every citizen, especially people in influential positions of power, that they are not immune to justice.
Now, as Kenya entered a second day of mourning for Daniel Arap Moi, the country's longest-serving president, those who suffered under him have refused to celebrate his legacy. Moi led between 1978 and 2002, and though he was a stabilizing influence, many suffered from his authoritarianism and are still not ready to forget.
In this Nairobi building called Nyayo House, Daniel Arap Moi's government set up torture chambers. Moi died on Tuesday, and victims of his regime regret that he never faced justice. He ruled the country for 24 years, a record, and in the 1980s his rule was particularly brutal. Mugo Theuri was held for 49 days in a cell filled with water. He was not the only activist to be detained.
Quite a number of them died from the torture. Some of them were killed. Some of them just disappeared. Others went into exile. It was a terrible time. People could not speak.
Mugo Theuri wrote a book that is a collection of tales from survivors of torture cells. He calls Moi a brutal tyrant, but believes the former president must have been tormented by his actions.
Maybe he suffered more than I did, because he could not have closed his mind. His conscience could not have ignored the atrocities that were committed, either through his orders or by people working for him. Those atrocities, he can't run away from that.
Moi never addressed his victims, and he refused to engage with the nation's Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. It was established in 2008, 6 years after he left power. He spent the last years of his life on his vast estate and played the role of a respected elder statesman.
Now, Malawi's president said that he will be appealing against a landmark ruling this week that saw the Constitutional Court overturn last year's election results. Peter Mutharika won narrowly in those polls, and the outcome was later challenged by his opponent Lazarus Chakwera. A rerun has been ordered to be held within 150 days. The world's top tennis players arrived in Cape Town on Wednesday ahead of a much-anticipated charity match due on Friday. The event pits Rafael Nadal against Roger Federer in order to raise money for Federer's foundation, which supports education across Africa. More than 50,000 people are expected to turn out. Ahead of that, our team went to one of the schools currently being supported by Federer's charity. Take a look.
The Federer Foundation is investing here in one of the poorest areas of Africa. This school in Limpopo is among the 600 establishments in South Africa sponsored by the Tennis Stars charity. Money will go towards training kindergarten teachers, an often overlooked stage in the country's educational infrastructure.
When they came here, I think they help us in need, especially in the crashes. Those people, sometimes they just have the equipment, but they don't know how to help to use them.
To get the funding, the school had to fulfill a number of conditions, including building a playground with equipment made entirely from recycled materials.
And the good part of this school is that all what you see here in the natural ground was done by the parents.
The principal here strives for the very highest of standards. He has never met Federer himself, but knows that a lot is expected of him.
Here we have him with the photos we have taken from when he was traveling abroad.
Roger Federer's foundation has helped 1.5 million children in southern Africa since 2004. The sportsman has a particular soft spot for South Africa. It's where his mother, Lynette, was born. Today, she also plays a key role in the running of his foundation.
Because I don't play good cricket, I can only play a little bit of tennis. So let me show you how I play a bit of tennis, and then we can play together. So it's emotional, it's motivating to do this. Now obviously I'm very excited to see, the help it has provided over the years. I know, from my close ones, from my family, from my foundation, what has improved, and now that I'm here, I can see it for myself, which is very exciting.
The charity has been funding these kids for 2 years now, and most of them want to show their sponsor how much of a difference his support has made.
And finally, we leave you with sad news of the end of Big Tim. The elephant was one of the continent's last super tuskers, an animal whose tusks are so long that they scrape the ground. The 50-year-old Kenyan passed away at Amboseli National Park at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro this week. Now, he managed to dodge the risks of poachers throughout his life, but sadly, big tuskers like Big Tim are in far shorter supply today, as they've been the first to be targeted by poachers, and so the genes for big tusks have been murdered out of elephant populations. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.